event. For any of you not familiar with JustShare, which partly lives here at St Mary Le Bow, we are a small campaigning organisation seeking to discover the economic conditions right here in the heart of the City of London, which would make for the flourishing of the developing world. Fairtrade and the promotion of Fairtrade is part of our profile, and I happen to be the chair of the City of London Fairtrade Steering Group, and I hope you're heartened by the fact that the City of London is in fact a Fairtrade zone. If you go to the Mansion House to an immense banquet, you are assured of Fairtrade coffee at the end of dinner, which is really rather encouraging, and thanks to the campaign that was run here. So here we are in the heart of Fairtrade Fortnight, and you are very welcome to this event. There is another Fairtrade event here on Friday at lunchtime at 1:05. I've no idea why everything in this church starts at 5 minutes past the hour. I've sometimes wanted to change it, but I've never quite had the courage. So 1:05 on Friday, and it's a Meet the Farmers event, and Divine Chocolates are bringing across some farmers from Ghana, and that will be an opportunity to hear them talk about their experience and how Fairtrade works for them, and will be followed by Ghanaian refreshments, sponsored by the Ghanaian Investment Bank, which is just along the road in Cheapside, and at which the High Commissioner for Ghana will be present. So please do come on Friday if you would care to. The format this evening, very simply, is that our speaker will address us for a period of time, and then there's going to be a response from Tim Gutteridge of the Fairtrade Foundation, very briefly, and then there'll be an opportunity for comments and questions before refreshments at the end. And happily, our wine this evening is sponsored by La Riojana, which is a Fairtrade winery in the north of Argentina. So it's a very great delight and pleasure to welcome Professor Christopher Cramer tonight. We're very privileged and delighted to have you here. He is the head of the Department of Development Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is part of the University of London. He's taught at Cambridge and at the Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique, as also over time in South Africa, Seychelles, Ethiopia, Tanzania and Namibia. He is part of a number of international organizations specializing in development issues, including the UN Development Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. And his book, Civil War is Not a Stupid Thing, Accounting for Violence in Developing Countries, is in itself a prize winner. And since 2007, he has also participated in the Africa Task Force. Professor Cramer, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and for that very kind introduction. Although I feel a bit like the sort of spanner in the works of Fairtrade Fortnight, but hope I'm still allowed the wine afterwards, despite that. We'll see. You said that I will talk for a period of time. You're welcome to shut me up if I get carried away or anything. But I'm going to try and talk a little bit, not too globally. I want to be a little bit humble, partly, anyway. Okay, for the following reasons. I want to talk only about the research that we've done, mainly. Okay, and we have not tried to do a total study of does fair trade work or does it not, and therefore I can't lay claim to saying anything very, very global about that. So there's a limited amount that I can really claim to be talking about, and that's important to know. I also need to talk with a little bit of humility because we're at a particular stage in our research project. We have finished collecting all the evidence, but we haven't yet done all our analysis, and therefore I can't be wholly sure what the data will tell us. So I'm just trying out some kind of hunches from our observations, our experiences, so on and so forth. That's an important caveat. But that said, I do have a certain confidence about some of what we do want to say. I want to begin by saying that I think that the whole issue of fair trade and the debates around it are full of confusion. And in some ways, I want you to leave this evening still or even more confused. All right? In some ways less so, but in some ways more. There is consumer confusion. So the consumer goes down. I go down the aisle of Tesco's or Waitrose, or when I can afford it, or Sainsbury's or whatever. And what do? Should I be helping birds by buying bird-friendly coffee, or UTZ certified, or fair trade certified coffee, or other goods? Should I, if it's coffee, not buy anything with some label like that and buy good African coffee? I spoke last week with Andrew Rugasira, whose book, A Good African Story, on that brand and its history has just come out. It's very, very difficult. And people are faced by this plethora now of labels and certification bodies. Should they instead buy from a kind of major global corporation that lays claim to certain ethical trading standards? Starbucks, they have their own certification standards and monitoring system. How does that compare with the flow standards, so on and so forth? It's a difficult thing. It's hard enough in the aisles of the supermarket without this. This makes it harder, and I think that's an important source of confusion that needs some clarification for further reasons that I'll go into. There is also, I think, government confusion. So the last government here increased quite a lot, announced big millions of pounds that they would spend on supporting fair trade in this country. And then when the coalition government came to power, do you remember there was this story about a list? There was a list of projects and activities and expenditures that they might prioritize for cutting. And the fair trade stuff was very much on that list at first. So is it something that UK government should be supporting or shouldn't really be supporting? Confusion reigns. Confusion reigns partly because we don't actually know enough about what these things do and how and with what implications. So the third kind of confusion is in the academic debate, the research literature. And I want to just talk you through a little bit some of the way the debate can be cast, some of the claims that are made for fair trade, and some of the critiques. Often this is a rather sort of polarized debate. You get the kind of evangelical fair trade champions on the one hand, this is the only way to create global justice and reduce poverty. On the other hand, you have kind of wildly simplistic critiques sometimes from a very, very different perspective. And our research, I think, kind of does something a little bit different. So what do you find in terms of I'm not sure you can even see these slides very, very carefully. Very clearly. It says, the top, it says, yes, I'd like I can't even read it, a grande mocha skinny fair trade organic Kenyan roasted. And then the guy says, no, sorry, we're out of fair trade. And he says, oh, well, all right, I'll have free trade then instead. Okay? So, slight misunderstanding there, perhaps, what's going on. One claim is this, that fair trade seeks to change the lives of the poorest of the poor. I wonder, we'll hear from Tim if that's something that the Fair Trade Foundation here claims or not. That is a very big claim. And that's very important to my research, which I'll come back to in a minute. This is another kind of claim that you will come across. Fair trade addresses the injustices of conventional trade that discriminate against the poorest, weakest producers. All right? Hold on to those phrases, the poorest, the weakest. It's very important to my story. It enables them to improve their position and have more control over their lives. That's great, if it's true. And a third claim would be that the cooperative system, a lot of this, we're talking not so much big plantation things. I can't tell you much about those, because I haven't worked on bananas or cocoa in West Africa or whatever. I worked on coffee and flowers in Ethiopia and coffee and tea in Uganda. That's what I know something about. Okay? But cooperatives are very, very important there, especially in coffee. Cooperative system allows small farmers better access to global markets and encourages, get this, democratic representation. Okay. Now, there's these claims made for it, but there are various sources of critique as well. One is this standard kind of thing, oh, this is a pointless thing to do. It just means that people are stuck producing things that lock them into poverty. They shouldn't do it. And they're just living off handouts in the form of fair trade premiums and so on and so forth. I wonder what you think about that. There's another source of critique related to that, which is that what's happening is you're intervening in a market through a kind of minimum price thing and the premiums. And what you do when you distort markets is you mean that markets don't work optimally for most people. And in fact, you send the wrong distorted signal. Leads to oversupply, keeps the commodity price low. Who's ever going to escape from poverty that way? Okay? So what you should just have is just liberalized free markets. I've yet to really meet one, but there you go. There are other sources of critique, which are sort of those that at worst say it's a scam. Right? It's a very expensive thing to be certified, to join, and most of the money and the benefits don't actually accrue to the poorest, weakest producers, etc., etc. And to the extent they do, it's a limited number of relatively larger, relatively well-off Mexican farmers, for example. Okay. These are important things, and there are sort of naughty stories I could tell, but I won't tell, about that would kind of reinforce that claim. The main point for me is I think there are very, very powerful knowledge gaps. We don't know enough. I want to talk about that a bit more in a minute. And in a situation of uncertainty, what do I buy? Who do I believe? Do we have enough knowledge, etc., etc.? There's a space created for emotion and ideology and values to enter into the debate. And I think the whole business of consumption becomes a very, very emotional business for us all. Do you know this phrase from psychoanalysis, fantasy with a PH? Right? It's about the kind of stories we tell ourselves that help us make sense of things. And they, in a way, what they are, some people define it as an unconscious fantasy with an F, becomes a PH when it's unconscious. But it's about projecting feelings onto objects and people and making sense of our relationships to those objects and people. It's beautiful. That's exactly what happens with lovely labeled fair trade coffee or flowers or whatever it may be, maybe a picture of an apparently small farmer, whatever that means. So it makes us feel in our consumption that we're connecting to the object, to the people, so on and so forth. At the same time, we have these ideas, you remember what I was saying about cooperatives, of these ideas that cooperatives are really lovely, democratically organized, equitable organizations in something we'll call the Global South, so on and so forth. Great idea, if it's true. Reminds me of, I don't know if we're even allowed to mention Lenin in here, but Lenin wrote very, very interestingly about cooperatives in late 19th century Russia, and I might come back to that later because I remember, often when I'm in rural Ethiopia, these words of Lenin's about critiques of cooperatives they're incredibly relevant in contemporary experiences. Yes? Oh, sorry. Yes, we'll shout. Okay. So, this knowledge gap that I was talking about, is that all right? Can you? Yep, fine. Thanks. A lot of the research on fair trade, both critical and supportive, is based on very, very quick studies, in and out, quick impact analysis, so on and so forth. Very little is often explained about the rationale for where the research was done. Why this sample of banana growers or coffee farmers or so on and so forth, rather than another one? Tell us more about it. It's very important to be open about these things. Very often, research under fair trade, when it's interested in smaller producers or workers or so on and so forth, takes a shortcut about how it gets access to those people. What's the best way to do? You go and ask the people who run the cooperative. Well, that's fine because it's a democratic thing and everybody's the same size, they're all small farmers. So they'll tell you and they'll show you some nice friendly farmers and so on and so forth. And then you become a useful idiot. because you get led to certain kinds of person, all right? This is very, very clear to me through my experience. Another problem with much of the research on fair trade is it doesn't compare fair trade with non-fair trade. It's not comparing similar but different things to see what's working, what isn't. All right? There's not nearly enough rigorous research. And this is something that's actually quite widely recognized in systematic reviews of fair trade, so on and so forth. It's something that's recognized by fair trade organizations themselves often. Even more importantly, and this is where our research comes in, remember those claims about helping the poorest. Who are the poorest? One of the main assumptions, particularly for things like coffee, is that we're dealing with small farmers who hire family labor. They're not the poorest. The poorest people, they may well do their own farming, but they're people who, in order to live, to survive, and they may yet go to bed hungry most nights, they depend on access to wage employment. And they may get those wage opportunities seasonally, casually, on quite small farms. All right? They are, in much of this research, invisible, particularly on coffee. Completely invisible. The standards, Tim will probably tell me I'm wrong, but the standards on fair trade for so-called smallholder crops make this assumption explicit, and therefore they don't contain information about standards for certification according to the treatment of wage employees. It takes 10 minutes of field work to blow this idea out of the water. 10 minutes. And yet there's very, very little research. That is where our research focused and where I think we can contribute something. This is the name of our project. It's called Fair Trade, Employment and Poverty Reduction in Ethiopia and Uganda. And in a way, the question we began with was this. If you are a very poor rural person, and in order to survive, you have to get access to some wage employment, does it make a difference if that job, that work, is on a fair trade certified co-op supplier or on a fair trade certified flower farm stroke factory? And if it makes a difference, does it make the best difference? And it is really, really difficult to answer that question. And what we, in a way you can see it here. So this is a picture which has two coffee washing stations in it. The one here at the front, at the bottom, is fair trade certified co-op. As it happens, a very, very well-known one. The one on the other side of the valley there is a private coffee washing station. You see these people here. You can't quite see people maybe on those drying beds for coffee on the other side on the hill. Is there a difference? What difference is there? Is there any difference in the treatment of wage, the number of hours, etc., the pay, etc., etc.? It's a good question, I think, because nobody's really asked it before. And this is what we tried to get at. And we asked it in a variety of ways. Our methodology, you probably really, it's the sort of thing I get carried away with and you probably really don't want to hear about. But let me try briefly to summarize what we did. We did a survey where we didn't go to the owners or the runners of the cooperative, the executive and so on and so forth and say, please introduce us to some people we can interview. We did area-based surveys using GPS devices, handheld computers, and did our own little sort of quasi-census. And within that, we had a sample, randomized, stratified sample of people who we interviewed with a long questionnaire. It takes hours. So we ended up with this kind of census with information summed just on 4 questions or so on thousands and thousands of people. Particularly on those nearly 5,000 people. Then our main survey produced huge amounts of detailed data on 1,700 respondents across these 2 countries. 6 research sites. Well, no, hang on. 3 for coffee, 3 for flowers, 3 for coffee, 3 for tea, Uganda, Ethiopia, other way around. Then a couple of years later, we went back and mainly for coffee. There's a slight variation because we did it slightly differently in the two countries, but mainly for coffee in both countries. We went back and re-sampled. We did a shorter version of the same questionnaire to several hundred people who had been in our previous survey as coffee workers, to see if we could capture any change, really. And it's interesting the kinds of change that we may or may not have found. But there are certain things that you can't find out through a questionnaire and a survey. And we also did a large number. We've got, well, I think that number's wrong. I think we've got more than that. Well over 100 detailed working life histories, where you try to get information on when, at what age, and why people first entered the labour market, exited, re-entered, why, so on and so forth. That's what we did. This is somebody carrying out one of our life histories. Research supervisor, translator, respondent. Okay, you can look at the clothing. You can tell the hierarchy in a way. Now, then it gets to the nub of what we may have found, which is probably what you think is a little bit more interesting. Firstly, poor wage workers, they are the poorest people. Certainly in coffee, I think in tea in Uganda too, they are basically completely neglected by Fairtrade, and Fairtrade is largely irrelevant to them. I'm supposed to say provocative things, there you go. It's irrelevant. If you want to help the poorest people, buying Fairtrade coffees or tea is not going to help you. In some larger certified production activities, e.g. flowers, okay, it ought to be because the standards are different. They cover that. But actually, from what we found out, this is Ethiopian floriculture, fascinating sector. I'm not sure irrelevant is really the right word. It's essentially a disaster, I would say. Fairtrade is not doing better for workers on Fairtrade certified flower farms, or at least not the original one, than some of the other large, high-quality flower exporters based in Ethiopia, or from Ethiopia. And in fact, there's some evidence that there's a little bit of scamming going on with some of the kind of what's done with the premium, the social projects, so on and so forth. Okay, so there are real problems here, to the extent that you're interested in the poorest. This is a fair trade flower thing. It really, I mean, you know, the condition of those greenhouses is really appalling compared to, and there's lots of evidence a bit like that, compared to other ones in the same town, same area, so on and so forth. Rather than a kind of fair trade's wonderful or fair trade's completely useless thing, I think it's more a thing of it doesn't quite do what it says on the label. And one thing about that, and it may not even be a problem, but it's this, which is that in some ways, fair trade increases local inequality, is one way of putting it. What it does is it feeds into local dynamics of differentiation, we call it. And for some, it's about accumulation, not massive wealth and so on and so forth, but it does. And that partly is because, say, in flowers, really what it's about is it's a way of getting into the European market. It's a market access technique. It's not a big social thing in flowers, certainly not in Ethiopia. In the coffee thing, this is where the cooperatives become very, very important. This is where my Lenin thing, you know, Lenin talked about people's idea in late 19th century Russia that cooperatives were these lovely, democratic, equitable organizations. He said it's a tale told by kind-hearted people, but nonetheless a tale, and that's all it is. And that the reality is one of hierarchy, local power politics, inequality, so on and so forth. That's exactly what we encounter again and again and again. And just to sort of show you a little bit this inequality visually, if you like. This young lady, this is one of our research assistants in Ethiopia. This young lady is extremely poor. That's some of the material of the house she lives in. You go inside her little hut, there is nothing inside, nothing. We talk about benchmarking poverty or this or that. One of the things we do is that everybody you're interviewing, they'll bring you a little bench and you sit on it. One of our ideas about a benchmark is, do they have their own bench or do they have to borrow it from a neighbor or something? She had absolutely nothing, this young woman. And at the other end of the spectrum slightly, it's not a huge wealthy person at all. This might be a good thing. It is a good thing that there are local people becoming more productive, so on and so forth. Is somebody who's been on a co-op, a Fairtrade certified cooperative executive. He's actually a bit cross about it now, but so on and so forth. And, you know, with a three-piece suit, larger land, etc., bigger family to support, interesting investments, very, very interesting guy, benefiting quite a lot from the social projects in a private way, etc. So this, the way in which Fairtrade feeds into and in some ways amplifies these dynamics of differentiation is really interesting. As I say, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but it's important that one sees it for what it often is. So therefore one wants to ask, well, what might make a big difference, or any difference? What difference have we seen made on the ground? One of the things, and this is a problem, has been a problem for fair trade organizations for some time, although things have maybe changed to some extent, not everybody agrees, is quality. Often there's been a charge that the quality isn't good enough. Quality, arguably, is possibly something that makes a bigger difference. If you go all out for quality, right, you have to invest. You have to improve productivity. You actually have to hire more labor, generally, to get the best quality, whether it's the coffee or flowers or so on and so forth. You talk to Illy in Trieste, and they have this mantra with their coffee. They would claim they've never paid less than 30% above the market price. But they would say the difference between a commodity, a basic bulk commodity, and a specialty product is the absence of defect. Everything that goes into that, at the washing level, the care of the bushes, so on and so forth, is very, very demanding and labor-intensive. The one big change in our longitudinal, when we did our repeat survey, the one thing that made a biggest single difference that we came across was after our original survey, in the flower sector and the towns and near the towns, the government, the state in Ethiopia had introduced maternity leave and enforced it. That was the single biggest difference. Women were telling us a lot about how that made a difference. And there are things that aren't happening as well, where if you see the number of women who can't work because they can't take their children with them, or very, very tiny kids that are just left wandering all over the road, so on and so forth, there's a major shortage of creches and so on and so forth. There's a lot more I could say, but I'm going to, I think, kind of end, for the sake of argument, with a provocative view, which is to say, to deal with your confusion, what you should do is, rather than buying fair trade, spend your money, as much of it as you can, on the very best quality that you can. And I can't be completely sure, but I've got a hunch you're more likely to make a tiny difference that way than you are through fair trade. All right? I don't want to globalize. I do want to be humble in what we can say, but I hope I've introduced some questioning and some ideas, and perhaps we can talk about them later. And thank you very much.
Well, I guess every good campaign, every real enthusiasm gives birth to its own correctives. And to some extent, the integrity of any campaign is shown by the way it responds to those criticisms and correctives. So no pressure on Tim Gutteridge as he, from the Fairtrade Foundation, as he responds to Professor Cramer's talk.
Thank you. Quite how do I follow that? Let me start by saying a bit about me and why I'm here, why I'm the person stood here. I'm an accountant, 20 years in the charity sector, almost 5 of those with Fairtrade Foundation. I'm the Chief Operating Officer, so I have 2 broad responsibilities. One is around the day-to-day operations of the charity, so finance, HR, IT, the facilities, just making the charity function. My other function is around product integrity side of products within the UK. So I oversee a team of people who when companies apply for a product in the UK, they want to sell their products as certified as Fairtrade. They put an application into us. The team review that application. If it complies with the standards, they then certify the product. That then enables the company to then put our mark on the product and put that on a shelf in a UK supermarket or shop to sell the product as Fairtrade. So that's what I do. That's my role at Fairtrade. I'm not an academic. I am, I suppose, the true definition of a bean counter, accountant. I think Professor Cramer has highlighted some of the challenges that producers and workers face, and we, as the Fairtrade movement, face. We didn't have, as Professor Cramer says, they're still working on the data, so we haven't had sight of the data or all the findings, and I'm hoping we will get some of that information over the coming months and when he publishes it. But what I can tell you is the numbers for Fairtrade as the accountant. Currently we work in 66 countries, including 17 of the least developed countries in the world. In 2011, the farmers in the system exceeded 1.2 million. In 2011-2012, producer organisations reported sales in excess of 550 million. In that same year, they received social of around £53 million, which was invested by the farmers. I think backing up what Professor Cramer said about quality, what we find is from our own research and the impact that our auditors do, that 53% of the premium is actually that farmers receive is invested back into business development, organisational development, and productivity and quality increases. So very similar to the findings that Professor Cramer has made about improving the quality, because actually farmers want to improve as well, because that returns more of the price back to them if they can move up the value chain. We do, producers at organisation level will see the benefits of Fairtrade coming through just purely by being certified. However, it's actually the sale of the Fairtrade product that then returns the real benefits to the producer. The safety net of the minimum price, it's the social premium that gets paid through the product actually being sold under those terms. It's not actually the certification of the producer that gives them the... We don't know, because we didn't have site information, we don't know the specifics of how much of the products those groups are. I'm sure that will come out in the findings in due course. So it's hard for me to say, well, these people are not benefiting, these people are benefiting. Are they selling under fair trade terms? What I do know is that currently Fairtrade sales represent about 7% of the certifiable tea that is within the Fairtrade system. Coffee volumes, we sell around 30% of the certifiable production. Cocoa represents about 35% of the certifiable volume, and 6% of Kenyan flowers are exported. So this poses the interesting challenge, similar to the point Professor Cramer has made. Is it too early to be claiming that the system doesn't work, when actually there's still significant quantities of certified product that is not being sold in the markets as Fairtrade, and therefore those producers are missing out on those benefits? It's an open question, one that we can debate. As Ombudsman, I always want to ensure that things add up, and that we're making the best out of our resources. So it's our mission as a charity to improve the lives of producers in the South. In doing so, we are accountable to those producers, but also to the UK consumers and the companies who work, and our donors who work with us within the UK. So the companies that we work with want evidence about what's the impact within their supply chain. They're not interested in... They want to know what the impact was for their producers, because they want to talk about it to their customers. So historically, we therefore focused our limited resources in research to sort of prove and improve what we do. by focusing researches in areas where we are operating at scale, where we can be held to account by our key stakeholders, and we can identify what is working and, more importantly, what isn't working. Because it's by doing that we can then change what we do and move forward. The role of independent academics such as Professor Cramer are vital to our research. In fact, most of our research is done by independent academics. We use the Natural Resources Institute at the University of Greenwich, the Institute of Development Studies in Sussex, Sustainable Livelihoods Foundation in South Africa, and several other reputable researchers. As a movement, we're aim to be transparent. You'll find most of our research is published on our websites, the good and the bad and the ugly, and what we're doing about it, what we've learned about it, what we disagree with, it's all out there. We are up for the debate on what works and what doesn't. In finishing off, I just want to examples of what we found through our research. In 2010, the Fairtrade Foundation in the UK, we initiated a long-term evaluation of 5 Fairtrade certified organisations in Malawi to understand impact over time. The first assessment conducted by our research partner highlighted that Fairtrade was beginning to make a small difference, but many challenges remained. For instance, the research showed that in one sugarcane cooperative, there were more workers than farmers involved in harvesting the sugarcane. These two groups did not have equal access to the say in how the premium was used, and as a result, over the next 2 years, we worked with the cooperative, its leaders, the mill, and the workers to help address this issue. On the second phase of that research, in 2012, the research indicated that the farmer-worker ratio had halved, meaning that there was a fairer share of the work. Workers had become unionised and now had a say in the use of the premium, and they were benefiting from it. A similar piece of research into Fairtrade bananas in the Dominican Republic revealed that many banana farmers employed workers from neighbouring Haiti who had migrated into the country seeking work. However, the study revealed that they did not directly benefit from the Fairtrade premium in social projects as their families were back in Haiti. Recognising this and working with the cooperative, they decided to use actually part of the premium to build a school back in Haiti where their workers' families were, rather than within their own area. So actually the workers' benefited back in their original country. I could give more examples. I think there are examples of how we find things that don't work, we change it, and we move on. I think the examples that Professor Cramer has raised, we find show that it's a complex business. There are no easy answers. Attributing impact to a specific one source is challenging. It's very easy for us to highlight what works and doesn't work from our positions here. We are open to the debate. We want to know the information, and we look forward to hearing from Professor Cramer and working with him through his data so we can actually change and improve and solve the problems that he's highlighted. Thank you.
Grand. Thank you very much for a very spirited and thorough response. So now there's an opportunity for people here to make comments or to ask questions, mindful that a lot of that is quite detailed and quite specific research. People may want to stray away from that, or they may want to ask for clarifications. We've got about 15 minutes. What I propose is to take about 3 initial comments and then ask for some responses. Sir, your microphone is coming, and... Sorry? Yeah, absolutely. A microphone is coming, and if you could speak...
It's easy to come up with individual examples of businesses which perhaps operate more effectively than a rather large and amorphous organization like Fairtrade. For instance, Union Coffee here in London is an absolutely outstanding organization run by two chaps who trained with Pete's in Berkeley, and you don't get any better than that. They have personal relationships with their suppliers that are wonderful, but you certainly pay for it. It's a very, very expensive coffee. At the practical level, if I'm going out and buying coffee in a shop and I don't know intimately the brands on the shelf, I feel rather secure that if I buy something which says fair trade on it, somebody out there is going to benefit more from it than if I buy something that says Nescafe on it.
Right, that's very helpful. Thank you. A comment here? Sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, both of you, for really interesting talks. Can I ask a question of Professor Cramer? You've made a very clear case that wage workers are excluded from the benefits of fair trade in the case of coffee. What I'm struggling with is what is happening to the other people, because the fair trade system is guaranteeing a minimum price, it's paying a premium on top of that. So are you basically saying the cooperatives are creaming off all that extra money so none of it gets to the workers, or what? I'm really interested in your initial ideas of what's actually happening, because undoubtedly more money is going in through the fair trade system.
Yeah. A third comment on the far side over there. Madam, thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting, especially the bit about Uganda, where I know I've come across coffee cooperatives. But you seem to be saying that fair trade cooperatives were only a way of getting into the European market. I just wondered, well, what's wrong with that? If more people get into that market, then more people are getting a job and getting money. And no, you're not going to help all the poorest of the poor, but maybe more poor people were getting helped. Yeah. Can you just comment on that? Thanks.
That's great. Thank you for those. Union is superb. I agree. And I'm a tiny bit biased because Stephen is on our advisory group for the research project, and I would rather not speak for him about what he thinks about fair trade versus his model or whatever. I'd rather, another event where he could do that. But I do know that they've got people working for them doing not unrelated research, actually, which has found some similar stuff to us. But they do fascinating, their own work, but also their self-study, if you like, is very, very interesting. But you're right, it costs. I'm prepared to pay that. Sometimes, because I do have a bit of faith in that. And whereas if I go in and I've got the broad generic certified, whether it's fair trade or something else, versus the Nescafe, that's where fantasy comes into it. Sometimes, I think. We've got baggage about what we think Nescafe is and so on and so forth. We've got preconceptions about what we think fair trade does. What I'm trying to say is, I understand we make quick decisions, sometimes we have to, but we do need to know rather more about both, I think. And the very complex thing about fair trade is it does work in very different ways across commodities and across countries and within countries. It's terribly difficult to generalize, and I wouldn't want anything I said to be a big generalization. One reason for that is that I think that fair trade doesn't happen, the certification, the payments, the premiums, so on and so forth, in a vacuum. They take place in a very real political, in a local sense, but also sometimes a grand sense context. And that affects how they operate. Okay, so anyway. And then the gentleman asked about, well, look, it may be that many of the very poorest aren't benefiting hugely, but somebody must be doing all right from the minimum price and the premium. The minimum price I think minimum prices, whether they're international or state or whatever, can be very, very important interventions. In recent years for coffee, it's been largely irrelevant because the market price has been above where that's been set. So nobody's hugely benefiting from that at the moment. That doesn't make it irrelevant in some circumstances. However, the premium is a really interesting thing, and it's to do because the payment comes in two payments very often. So suppliers to a certified cooperative, for example, might get one payment now when they hand over the bags of coffee and another in a few months. There's a delicate decision-making process then. Can they wait? They probably do. It's unclear. It varies. Sometimes it is a bit clear that they would do better to wait. Sometimes it's not that much better if they wait. But there are other pressures on them, pressures of extreme poverty for some of them. And the pressures go in two ways. One is a private buyer comes along and says, look, I'll give you the money now. And they'll take it. And in the short run, that might be what they need. So in that way, they're not necessarily benefiting from it, and not hugely anyway for some of them. The second kind of pressure is that there are examples where small farmers who are producing coffee are actually under local political coercive pressure to sell to the Fairtrade co-op. Okay? That's what I mean by local politics affecting this. It probably doesn't make a vast difference, but they know there's that pressure. So the local politics, who's on the co-op executive, what their connections are to local political leaders, matters quite a lot. There's then the issue, there's two more things to say on that. One is that because of the inequality that I mentioned, right, the larger farmers and suppliers within the cooperative, they're benefiting. And that's fine by me. It's absolutely fine by me. Just put it on the label. The smaller cooperatives, proportionally much less, all right, from the extra when there's an extra. Bear in mind, too, that it varies, and Tim was giving some suggestion of this because it varies enormously, but, and the tea farmers in some places certified in Uganda, they're selling a tiny proportion of what they produce through fair trade channels. Same with some of the coffee producers. So there are limits on the benefit. And the final thing on that is the nature of how the social premiums are spent. Okay, often these things, by the way, there are other benefits too, because if you're certified in some countries, if you're fair trade certified, you can sell directly. You don't have to go through other institutional mechanisms. You don't have to pay taxes. The subsidies that this involves are huge. So something really ought to come of it. But anyway, there's these issues about the kind of democratic decision of what happens with the... That's a Pandora's box. Sometimes it works, and it's participatory, sometimes not. And the third question, market entry, why not? I agree. Again, put it on the label. But the thing to make clear there is it's not in that flowers case, the floriculture one. It's not about a small producer. That's about, actually, as it happens, UK-based businesses. It's about fairly large businesses, enterprises, who are thinking, well, there's one way of getting into market and there's another. I don't necessarily mind if it employs people and it does better and so on. It doesn't do any better than any of the others, but that's just all it is, in a way. Okay.
Three more questions or comments. This lady here.
Thank you very much. What do I do? Hi.
Yes, and the answers, clearly. Sorry.
Yes, of course. Janet Deane. I'm a professor at Queen Mary University of London. We have a project. Well, we finished it actually, and here's the result. Obviously, I agree with many of your points, but in fact, we found that some of particularly the social premium, actually helped for fair trade. For the employees. There's no doubt at all. Maybe we were just lucky. One of our projects were in South Africa, and there's no doubt that the premium were actually wonderful.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk, and thank you, Tim Gutteridge. Thank you, Tim Gutteridge, for your response as well. It's really good to get both points of view. I'm currently working at the foundation 3 days a week, and so I come at it with a particular perspective. But I was lucky enough a couple of days ago to meet some of the producers that come over for the producer tour for Fairtrade Fortnight and talk to them a bit about what their experiences were with Fairtrade. So I'm lucky enough to have had that chance.
I bet they said it was terrible.
They didn't say it was terrible, but they didn't say it was perfect either. So I guess my concern is that I think you raised some really interesting questions, and I think that a lot of what Tim said was also really good in relating to what you've spoken about, and I hope that going forwards, the research you do can be done kind of in tandem with the foundation. My worry is that the issue of wage labourers and the issue of the poorest of the poor might somehow skew the debate so that we get this image that somehow there's these sort of super rich, larger smallholders who are dining off exploiting the poorest of the poor, and that they're somehow creaming it off and co-ops don't work and so forth and so forth. I think it's important to accept that in normal business there would be an aspect of politics, because that would happen anywhere, and I think that would maybe be unfair for us to assume that somehow in the developing world things are going to be perfect if only they're all in co-ops, because it wouldn't be the same. It would be problematic anywhere. So I wonder how you will approach it so that you don't end up alienating the issue of social justice to the point where you're attacking the people that maybe you're actually kind of should be working with or are part of in the larger picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a simple question, really, taking us back to coffee. If there's already lots and lots of producers, which will have an effect, producing oversupply, I mean, couldn't you argue that fair trade, actually, all it does is encourage more and more poor people to produce more and more coffee and lever the price down as a result?
I suppose, thank you very much for this. 3 minutes. Short answer, twofold. One is that why not make what is produced be produced on better terms? I think that would be, the argument, and that it's not really doing enough to encourage extra oversupply. The second thing is that this is where the quality comes in, because at the specialty level of coffee, there's actually, there are returns in it. You produce bulk Robusta, it's a bit of a mug's game. But if you can produce really, really high quality coffee, there's decent returns in it. The third thing is, I think medium to long run, global market for coffee will expand. What happens when countries industrialize? They stop being tea drinkers, they become coffee drinkers. Chinese coffee demand will rocket, so I wouldn't give up on coffee. But anyway, that's that one. Your questions are really beautiful, very lovely and very sensible points, I think. I think just as you're asking, you're speaking as a very sophisticated person and consumer, so on and so forth, the answer has to be similar, but it has to be that there has to be a bit more openness. Okay? I think you're right. What you're picking up on is the fact that there is beginning to be, you just heard over there, more research. What's best is if that research isn't just sort of antagonistic, two blocks against each other, that we do try and work together constructively. We will have things to say we think will feed into certification. Not say don't do it, how it might be done a bit better. And I think, your thing about not creating an idea of a local super rich is a really good idea, it's a very, very good point. Just be open about it. I think we're hiding behind fantasies, and we can treat people as more grown up. They can understand this better, I would say. And on the social premium, I don't know if you got lucky. I mean, I think it does vary enormously. It really does vary enormously. I think even there, though, the issue is there are projects, there are health things, there are schools, there are road things. Again, the question usually to ask is, who are the people who benefit from them and who doesn't? And our findings say what they find. Yours may differ, may overlap, but hopefully, overall, between us, we're adding to the knowledge base, I would hope.
A mantra might seem to be more coffee and certainly more research. That would seem to be where we are. We're vastly in your debt, Christopher Cramer, and also to you, Tim. Thank you very much for a most interesting evening. Do please join us for refreshments now. Take away with you one of these flyers so that you can put in your diary the other JustShare events that are coming up for the spring and the summer. Thank you very much indeed, both of you.